Oh, thank you. Thank you for turning up on a Sunday morning. I didn't want to be here, so I don't know about you guys. Second night's always the worst as well, isn't it? Didn't get much sleep last night as we were emailing each other at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's a great pleasure to be here. John suggested this when I met him at the British Council meeting back in January, I think, so here I am. Squeezing a trip into Hong Kong, a city I've always loved, and it's great. I'm not seeing much of it on this trip, but it's great to be back. I also want to thank Brian and Jack and everybody for organising this. It's a long time since I've been to a digital culture. I've never been to a digital cultures conference before, but without going over my entire history, I started my work, I'm a pure mathematician originally, which is even more scary than being a computer scientist. I gradually moved into computers in the 80s, and I cut my teeth, so to speak, on computers in the humanities. My first conferences were very much about the use of computers. In those days, we were talking about taking historical archives, historical records, and digitising them. We did a lot of work on Lord Mountbatten's archive and Winston Churchill's archive, and that's how I got into multimedia and hypermedia. And we had some wonderful papers yesterday. They were very inspirational, some of the things I heard you talk about, particularly our 2 keynotes yesterday, both of which have inspired me a lot. I started off, I can't tell you the whole history of how I got into multimedia and hypermedia, but picking up a bit on Saskia's points yesterday about when she was putting the engineers in a box. But, here's 2 of the most famous, Vince Cerf and Bob Kahn, who are described as the inventors of the internet. And I'm going to distinguish between internet and the web, right? We tend to conflate the ideas that everything's the internet, people get on the net. Actually the web is the software that now allows you to get to the internet, which is the network of computers. And in my world, that's really important. Although generally, to the great unwashed out there, the non-techies, that's a bit of a joke really, but anyway, it doesn't matter what it is, right? It's something for them to use to communicate with each other and all the other things we do now. So Vince and Bob invented TCP/IP, which is the protocol that enables the computers to talk together. And this man here, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, Englishman, was working at CERN, and you all know the story, I hope, Switzerland, and invented this thing called the World Wide Web, which is really a set of protocols, HTML, HTTP, that allow us to exchange information on the internet, and sort of the killer application for the internet. And this was if you look on the web now, you can see it. His proposal he wrote in 1989 is in the middle of that slide there. And he called it in 1989 Information Management, a proposal. He hadn't called it the World Wide Web by then. And if you look on that diagram, you can see the entire vision of the infrastructure of where we are today. He talks about hypertext, he talks about the internet, he talks about how he's going to use HTML and HTTP. And even in the bottom right-hand corner, he describes what has become the semantic web. And I haven't got time to tell you what that is and means really, but I'll say a little bit more later. It's all about using the web to link data. And he set up the web to enable physicists to share information. There are some of you in this room as old as I am, and that remember how you did things before the web, and you had to FTP files, and things like Gopher and Waste around to access files on this new thing called the internet in the 80s. Tim will say, I thought I created the web to link documents. Actually, not created, invented the web, I'll come back to that. Invented the web to link documents. Actually, now I know it's about linking people. And that's going to run through my talk today, the issue of how we, the people, and the machines work together to create this environment. I was lucky enough to meet Tim before the web, We met at a hypertext conference in Paris in 1990. That was written March 8, 1989. And his boss, by the way, I forgot to say, his boss, Mike Sendall, under the magnifying glass at the top, his boss, you can see the words, his boss wrote on the top of that document, vague but exciting. And that gave Tim permission to carry on. His day job was effectively a systems programmer at CERN. He was very young in those days. And that gave Tim permission to carry on as part of his day job. And actually, you know, the history of why the web went from nothing to this. I'm a mathematician, so you're going to see graphs this morning. Very interesting how the different cultures talk about information. Historians write books, sociologists talk endlessly. I don't mean Saskia, I'm talking about my colleagues at home. But this is the 25 years of the web. Tim put the first website up in Christmas 1990 when he had nothing better to do. He put up the first website, and so there was one website. And just remember back to what that was like. There was nothing there, nothing there, and it's now everything everywhere. And the story of how that happened is quite. The historians will look at this over and over again in the future, because it's not at all clear why this became the dominant hypertext system. My arguments are that it was the open and freeness. There's lots of things that Tim got so right that others of us, I was building a hypertext system at the time. It was wonderful, it's called microcosm, but it didn't do a lot of the things Tim did, which was, Tim was decentralized, like the internet, so that anybody could put a website up, maintain it, and wasn't dependent on any central administration. It was open, the protocols were open, the standards were open, so anybody could. You had to email Tim at the time to get the standards, because there was no other way to do it, but anybody could set up a website, and it was free. And that's really important. And that was part of Tim's values, but also his vision that the idea of this hypertext, that people would put their documents onto this internet thing, marked up using HTML, and would bother to do that only if you got a return on your investment, if lots of other people were doing it as well. His argument was either everybody will do it or nobody will. And in order to make that happen, I have to give it away. Now, if you've been a Bill Gates or a Steve Jobs, we might have still had a web, but we don't know what it would have been like, and it might not have been ubiquitous. We might have had the problems that we have with, you know, am I using a PC or an Apple or whatever? Different webs for different hardware, which would not meant, it might have meant, it's not like it is today. So, and that not only drove the take-up of this, but it's driven everything since. So when you think about if you're a Google or a Facebook or a Twitter, so just the red line, if you can't see, that's the estimate of the number of users. This is of the internet. One of my ex-PhD students keeps this graph up to date with me, and the blue line is the number of hosts. So it's a sort of a reflection of the number of people actually using a web. And the green line is Facebook, and then the purple line that starts with 2008 is Twitter. You all have the same starting point. You start with nobody using your system, and you have to persuade lots of people to use your system, and it's not till it goes viral. And you know when something goes viral because you hear people talking about it, or you see it on the email, or you see it nowadays on Twitter, or whatever. And suddenly you're in a world where you can't remember never having heard of Facebook, or Twitter, and it seems to happen suddenly, whereas these things grow quite slowly, and then, so you have to have this sort of exponential takeoff with a tipping point. And that's part of what, you know, we techies are studying, but with the people who understand why these things happen. What was the what are the economics, the legal, the social things that are happening around that time that enabled this to happen. Now, of course, we're still in the first 25 years of the web. These curves, and I haven't got time to show you this research, these curves are flattening out. Not the use of the internet itself, but the Facebooks and the Twitters are flattening out. And they won't survive. These social networks are going to come and go. And it's very interesting. I mean, there was something called MySpace. Do you remember MySpace? And of course there are, this of course, by the way, I should say, is the Western view of this. I've got a little bit of the China view in a minute, but this is the Western view of what's happened. And it's too early in the life of all this to see how the social networks are actually going to play out. Interestingly, at the moment, is this is where I need the economics and the business people and the sociologists to understand how these companies are evolving, because they're not companies in the sense before the web where you could sell product like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs did, and you knew how many customers you had, and you had all that prediction on that. This is all about going viral and then trying to make money afterwards, trying to create a business model. The most successful of all is Google. But interestingly, so I could tell this, I could just talk to this slide for an hour. I won't, I'll stop in a minute. But so Google emerges 10 years after the first website goes put up. You can't imagine that. You think Google's always been there. And you will remember using the Yahoos and the, what else did we used to use? Alta Vista?
Ask Jeeves.
Ask
Jeeves.
Well, no, that's post-Google. Yeah, isn't it? I believe so. Look it up on the web, on Google. The ones, I mean, the first websites, the first search engines weren't really search engines. When there were very few websites around, the search engines wouldn't have worked. There wasn't a scale to it. So the Yahoos and the Alta Vistas at the time very much just published websites that might be interesting for you to look at. And a lot of it was spread by word of mouth as well. We used to put links on our homepages, so these are interesting links to follow. And Brill and Page, who founded Google, they published a paper in 1998 that was the mathematics behind Google, the PageRank algorithm. And everyone said, great idea, and never scale. So they then had to prove it scaled in engineering terms, and then they had to find a business model to make it work. Now they've been a very clever company and they've diversified. They still make their money on their search engine, but they've hugely diversified into things like automated cars. Now who would have predicted that? But when you look at it, you know that's why they did Street Map. Right, this is all part of a very clever plan. So Google have diversified, and also I should say, Google, oh, there's so much to say about this. The thing about Google, why it's a better search engine than anything that came before, is because it uses the hypertext in the web as part of the algorithm. So effectively it's a big recommender system, and every time you use Google, you click on the link, say I'm going to go to that one, that feeds into the system, and basically we feed the beast in every which way, right? We use Google, we click on a link, that gives them information about us, and it helps to refine the system. And so it goes on. But all we get is a list of links back, and then we choose which one we follow. So many stories about this. The other thing about, let's just look at the dot-com bubble. Oh, two things. Before we get to the dot-com bubble, one of the things that really made the web take off, because Tim isn't perfect. He may be treated like a god these days, but he's not absolutely perfect. He did his first interface for the web was wrote it on an X machine, and it was both read and write, because his prediction was people would want to write to the web as well as read it. So not just put documents up, but actually create stuff. And so his first user interface was both a reader and an editor, so that you could create. But you had to be fairly techy to use the editor. And the Mark Andreessen and his team at NCSA produced Mosaic, which is how most of you, if you remember it, will have first seen the web through the Mosaic browser, which was read-only. And that had to evolve. the browser, we have the Navigator wars, we have the browser wars because they commercialised that as Netscape Navigator. Bill Gates famously ignored it for a while and then said, no, we need this, we need to put this in the operating system, so Internet Explorer went in the operating system. And people around, so Amazon starts at about 96, and people start piling into these what we call .com companies with money, thinking they're all going to become Bill Gates, not understanding the ecosystem that this is working in. And if you look at the technology spectrum, or story, Wi-Fi and broadband don't start to emerge until the turn of the century. So that bubble had to burst because there's nobody actually out there with computers in the home. If you remember, it was the worldwide wait. You used to try and get on through a modem and it would go, and time out. There's no way you could have a fulfilling shopping experience in those days. So that bubble was bound to burst. We've had lots of bubbles booming and bursting since. But it's all, to me, what I'm trying to show you here is that you can't, and this again is what Saskia suggested, you cannot look at this from just one disciplinary perspective. It's too complex and it's too multi-dimensional because you've got all sorts of things going on, how people like to do what people like to do, the herd instinct that we have, and the technology curve. So we're going from Wi-Fi and broadband into a mobile world, the more interactive browsers have led us into the social networking world, all of which was partly predicted but not in the way that it's happened. So Wikipedia starts in 2001 as a potentially great idea, and look, out of it we've got our world encyclopedia, our world encyclopedia. And in 10 years, it's become, or less, 14 years, it's become the de facto standard for looking things up. And it is dependent on us writing to it. And it's developing its own governance protocols now, and there are all sorts of controversies about who is allowed to edit, who is allowed to take pages down. There's the whole, if you don't know it, look up Gamergate and feminism about games and the rulings Wikipedia made, and there's very interesting stuff going on here, and you see the reflections of what we do as society, but mediated by the technology, and that's what we're having to learn: is what does that mean, and how can we think about how these things will go on in the future? Because in terms of our civilization, this is a blink of an eye. Right? And it's become so dominant. And we could kill it as fast as we created it. And we have to think about what that means. And I'll say now, that really the most important thing I want to say to you is, nobody owns this. No one country, I mean China may be trying to, but that's another story. No one country, no company, there's no shareholders, it's of us. Right? And so my argument is it's up to us to look after it. Anyway, I'll maybe come back. Now, what else did I want to say? Yeah, so we're into the mobile web. Right, I'll tell other stories as we go along. So, this is a very piece of work in progress. And my friends at Tsinghua University told me that everything started in 97 in China, and I have no idea why they told me 97. Yesterday you told me 95, 94. I don't know what their starting point was. So what I'm interested in doing is that curve that I showed you at the beginning. I want to create that for every region of the world. I want a graph like that. Oh, sorry. For all the different experiences countries, regions have had. And here's a very embryonic, I've got a PhD student signed up who can speak Mandarin, who's going to help me with this work, and my colleagues at Tsinghua, as to how, and the curves are always, well, they're sort of, they're the same, but the company names are different, and then of course, on top of this, you've got, what we're going to have to do is put the commentary about what's happening in the politics. And so I haven't mentioned the word politics before now, but in this Western world, let's go about the right way, there's a lot of politics in the Western world, particularly post-Snowden, about, actually there's a, no, I won't say this again. knowing about, now we know that all the different countries are spying on the other countries to find out what their users are doing. There's a huge amount of politics in it, and the regulation of a country will determine very much some of these curves. And of course in China, I'm very interested to see what happens as we go forward. And what we're also doing, what I'm trying to do, is I want to put stories over these graphs, telling stories of what happened. Now, I don't really know what the Xiaomi phone controversy was, but that was something in China. And I do remember the 18th National Congress where the delegates were allowed to, I'd call it tweeting, but put comments onto Weibo, I suppose. Yeah. Anyway, I just want to show that we are looking very much at other cultures, and of course we have to learn. I can't just impose my own. So we're in a space, used to be called Web 2.0, that sounds very passé these days, where we've got these social network companies, and of course most of those names are household names in the West anyway. I put MySpace up there to remind us that they do come and go, and there are stories now, research tales about the death of social networks, because we need to be able to predict when things are dying. And the other thing that happens is the big companies, so Flickr's still know that's where you put your photos, YouTube's where you put your videos. And there's always one of these, because effectively, because of the way Tim designed the web, there is only one of these things. Most people only use one social network, and you really want to be where all your friends are. So still, the majority of my friends use Facebook. I like Twitter because I like to broadcast. You know, I like to shout about things. But most of my friends use Facebook. But of course, their kids don't. Right? They do not want to be where their parents are, so they go to the Instagrams and the WhatsApps and the. But I say those terms. They've all been brought up by the big companies. So so Yahoo bought Flickr, Google bought YouTube, and when you think about the way that's changing how we get entertainment, totally dominating the way we get entertainment, and that's owned by Google. Also, Google just, I think there's some talk about MOOCs this afternoon. Google have everything to be the university of the world. They have the search engine, they have all our names and everything about us, they have YouTube, and they also have one of the platforms, which I forget which one it is, edX, they have a link with Harvard on that. They're a very clever company. We have to, I say this, it's not fair to Google, but I talk about them as the James Bond villain of the future, because they know everything about us, and if they're taken over by the wrong people, you can imagine Bloomfield running Google and holding the whole world to ransom as a result. But anyway, that's a bit of, I'll write my science fiction book about that maybe. So, I must press on, I've got lots to tell you. This is just another example of a story, the very beginnings of Twitter, the first 2 years, two and a half years. So it starts at the South by Southwest conference as just a good idea on mobile phones in 2007. And I know some people in the room know the mad and wonderful Sue Black. She was one of the first people on Twitter. BBC Click got onto it. And the green graph is the growth of the iPhone. And this is not statistically correlated. This is just a story and a picture. Okay? But what I tracked was the development of the iPhone when it went 3G and the growth of Twitter. Because of course, what fanned Twitter was the ability to tweet on the move, right? And so before that, you could just send a text message on your phone, but just a text message, so you didn't have all the clever stuff that Twitter and TweetDeck and all that gives you today. See who your followers were and all that. So you just sent it to your phone, your address book in your phone, and then you used your laptop and got on the Wi-Fi that way. And the Brits here will know Stephen Fry, the famous comic who got stuck in a lift in London in July 2008, summer of 2008, this went wild in the press because he tweeted, "I'm stuck in a lift." And I spoke to him about it after. He said, yeah, he just picked up his new iPhone, so he was able to do that. And my colleague Nigel Shabbott, an early adopter, I'm a late adopter, I didn't go on until a year later. And some of the things that in our world, the Western world, made this go big, the first Obama elections, the the flight, the Miracle on the Hudson, the flight that landed on the Hudson, when you suddenly, the world realises that you can get photos from a disaster site. Now look at that earthquake in Nepal yesterday. We see the dreadful photos and images that come out of that immediately, but in some ways that helps the relief effort as well. And that's on us. We have changed journalism, we have changed the way we communicate by using this technology and this infrastructure. So lots more stories to tell about Twitter, which is, I'm afraid, doomed as a company, as is Facebook, but that's another whole story. And I'm not an economist, but I've seen the graphs. So, now to cut a very long story short, well, to cut 20 years short, my world has been about developing, working with, getting multimedia onto the web, and very much getting into the semantic web. And people say to me, oh, well, semantic web, that's never happened. Actually, it's all around you, you just don't know it. It's behind the scenes. It manages, because it was always part of TIP's vision, as I said at the beginning, that the web would be about linking data as well as documents. And the reason why it's important to link data is because documents are very hard for machines to read. You still have to do an awful lot of text processing or image processing to give a machine any idea of what a document or picture is about. Whereas we, human beings, can look at something and immediately know what it's about, whether we're interested in it. That's how Google works. We pick the links to the documents we're interested in. But machines can manage huge amounts of data very easily and quickly in ways that although our brains process data all the time, machines can manage huge amounts of data instantaneously from lots of different sources. And the idea with the semantic web is that if you describe your data using ontologies, and this is something my sociology friend told me the other day, that I was ontologically insecure. And I said, what does that mean? She said, well, because I'd actually had to give the techies my iPhone because I was changing from a 5 to a 6, and I had a day without my iPhone, and I was almost shaking at work. She said, Wendy, you're ontologically insecure today because you need your iPhone to be... I said, what does that mean? She said, well, that's what the word ontology means, that's self-identity. Anyway, so I've learned a lot by talking to my sociology friends, but of course to me an ontology is something you use to do metadata. You describe a world of data. So if you describe the data to the machines, just like we do in databases, this is a person, this is an age, this is a street address, machines can very quickly make links between two different pieces of data. Identify that that's my name and that's a picture of me and link it. And that was what I was trying to do with the Mountbatten archive back in the 90s. And so behind the scenes today, many companies now are using this concept of the semantic web to create very richly linked environments. And the web, the internet, generates all this data. So we're now in this, we've got very fast computers, the networks, the web. We're in a world of huge amounts of data. Big data, broad data, deep data, whatever sort of data you want to call it. My colleagues Tim Shabbott, Nigel Shabbott and Tim Berners-Lee built the Open Data Institute in London, which is now being copied all around the world, to get governments to put data out. And I have to say, I've spoken to the Chinese government about open data. There's a lot of statistics you can put out that are not controversial. And putting this data out, we can create very rich information environments for people. But not all data will be open, of course. But that was a way for Tim to say to people, you brought me your documents, now give me your data. And his argument has always been that and we're beginning to see it now, that once we have the data linked, and we've got the documents linked and the people linked as a sort of side effect of that, then we will uncover knowledge we couldn't have uncovered it any other way. For example, the way to treat diseases, how to develop new drugs and treat diseases, understanding climate change, so many different things that we need the data in order to do that. And it is a new way of doing science, totally new way of doing science. I would include social science in that and the humanities. This gives us completely new research methodologies we didn't have 20 years ago. It's all happening mind-bogglingly fast, that's the trouble. So, moving on. That's the world we're in now. Why did we develop this idea called world science? Well, we developed this around 2004, so it's now 10 years ago since we first sat in Tim's office at MIT, drawing on a whiteboard the story of the web. This is with the man who invented it, because he didn't understand it either. He's just a techie. But he is. The trouble with Tim is you realise the genius of the man when you talk to him. You realise he had thought all this stuff through, he just didn't know how to articulate it. But we were thinking, well, actually, we, the people, society, have created this amazingly complex system that is evolving under rules we don't understand. It's not a natural system, so you can't use the rules of biology, and it's not a purely engineered system, so we can't predict it using just mathematics alone, and the science of the engineering that was used to develop it. We have to come up with new ways to understand how this ecosystem is growing. It's a socio-technical, and Saskia used the term yesterday, I think you said, Saskia, socio-digital formations. And it's the same idea. That actually, this is about, and this is what I find so powerful, this ecosystem is about networks of machines, who all talk to each other, that's the internet, and networks of people who can all talk to each other through these social networks, through the web, through the internet, coming together to create artifacts that couldn't have existed before. And the two networks don't actually know anything about each other. Right? That's my model of the world. You were doing this yesterday, Saskia. I think about hypertext, there's lots of links on top of paper on my desk. But so it's this coming, and I find this so amazing because it's happening around us all the time, and we're part of it. If you've read Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it's all being organised by the white mice anyway, and the answer's 42. But it's this concept that, Google, for example, is, a phenomenal amount of engineering goes on to run the Google algorithm, which harvests information from websites all over the world every day, which is just mind-boggling to me as a mathematician anyway. And then you've got, separate from that, but interconnected, the network of people who are putting that information up, searching for it, clicking on the links. Same happens in Facebook, in Twitter, right? It grows, and the amazing thing is that whilst we think about the technology changing society and shaping society, we actually change it, because the technologies create some very simple things. The web is so simple in many ways. Twitter was so simple, but we do complicated things with it, or we want to. And so we start, for example, in Twitter, the things like retweet, they weren't part of the original plan or spec for Twitter, but because people wanted to retweet and started to do it anyway, it's just like blogging. Blogs came out of diaries, weblogs, and when people started to hack together the HTML to create blogs, then the techies said, oh, well, people need a blog making machine, right? And then we've got on the blogosphere and all the link backs, and so It's this socio-technical, as my friend Susan Halford would say, co-constituted or co-created. We launched this in 2006 at, that's us, that's me looking very jet-lagged with Tim, Danny Weitzman, Nigel Chabot, Rob Brooks, who's professor, was head of CSAIL at the time at MIT, that's at MIT. We were the front page of MIT for that day. And I saw, because it was the inventor of the web that sent this, and so I saw the story roll around the world, and I thought, what do we do next? You know, it's like jumping off a cliff without wings. Is anyone going to take any notice? Well, we gave it the word web science because we couldn't think of anything better. And there's two things I hate about what we call about web science. One is web and the other is science. People think it's just about this technology called the web, and actually it's about people. We meant the web of people when we said that way. And the science bit is understanding. And despite the fact that sociologists come under the heading of social science, they back away from science. So anyway, for good or bad, and actually it's called lots of different things. There's lots of this stuff going on. And we just put up an umbrella and said, it might have been yellow, I don't know. We put up an umbrella and said, you know, this is actually good to study, and it's interdisciplinary. That's the absolutely key thing about it. We got a quote from Eric Schmidt at the time, which was very useful to us. And over the years, we've developed it into a not-for-profit trust. It started off as an initiative between MIT and Southampton. By 2009, we developed it into a not-for-profit trust. It doesn't give money out. It doesn't seek to raise huge amounts of money, but it coordinates sort of the dissemination of information about this subject around the world, tries to get people to do it. And this is the famous butterfly diagram, well, it's now sort of infamous. Nigel drew it on the back of a beer mat, I think, or something like that, which is trying to say there's a lot of different disciplines come together. There's things missing from that. There should be education on there should be philosophy on there. I can't remember, there's several key ones missing, but that was the original diagram. And trying to say you don't have to understand all of this to study this world, but you've got to do it from more than one perspective. So it's not the union and all that lot, but it's more than just the pinprick of the intersection. So we've tried to develop this interdisciplinary approach to studying this ecosystem. And you can look at our website. The next conference is in Oxford in June, and we've helped people develop curricula by just sharing information on our workshops. And one of the things we have is our Web Science Trust network of laboratories who were the big labs in various parts of the world that picked up this idea, got government support or whatever, and we worked together to try and evolve it. We've got 15 labs at the moment. We're bringing new ones on. People in India are coming on board. My team are in Adelaide at the moment, doing work there. I do a lot of work in Malaysia, Indonesia, because I really want these people to be part, obviously. This is a global thing. We need labs in all these places, but we started where the big labs with the money were, if you like. And now we're bringing on labs in other parts of the world. I don't know about Cape Town. There's people live in Cape Town. I need that link. But we've got links in Ghana now. And we've got University of Ghana here, actually, that's a good connection. And anyway, so this is where I live in Southampton, my building in Southampton. And the interesting stories, this is by the by. We're not very good in the UK at raising money for to build buildings. So when we built that building, was purpose-built for us, and there's education and us in there. And it was called Building 32. No, I've got more than 5 minutes, I'm sorry. I didn't start till 9 o'clock. He's put his 5 minutes sign up. I'm going till about another 5-10 minutes maybe. So, yeah, Building 32. And it's always still called Building 32. And when I went to go to Tim's lab office in MIT once, and I realised that building is Building 32 as well, so I thought that's a very good reason. This computer science at MIT is Building 32 as well, so we discovered that when we were doing the link. It's all about links. So we have, that's the slides in the wrong place. I might have to go back to that. So that's we have a doctoral training centre for web science, and the wonderful thing about this is it's so diverse. These students come from many different disciplines, from maths, from physics, from engineering, from sociology, from law, from economics, and you get the diversity, so you get men and women, because in computer science there's so few women in computer science, but in this world we get great diversity. Unfortunately, these grants are funded by the UK, but we have students from all over the world coming to study with us. Now I want to tell you about two things before I finish. The web as a social machine and the web observatory. The web, this is something that, as ever, Tim's ahead of the web science. Another way of explaining it is the theory and practice of social machines, and this was the term that Tim did in his book Weaving the Web in 1999, and this is a paragraph that's been parsed lots and lots of times. So he says, real life must be full of all kinds of social constraints, the very processes from which society arises. This is how we live. We learn to be civilized. We learn not to just go and mug someone in the street to get money, right? We have to get a job to get money, and all those sorts of things that we've learned over hundreds of years are our social constraints. And what he's saying is we need that for the digital world, and computers can help us create the society, the digital society, because we can use them to create abstract social machines on the web, processes in which people do the creativity and the machine does the administration. And that's the Googles, the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Wikipedias, the web. This is the machines and people coming together. The machines crunch the data, we crunch our brains, and it all interlocks, and we create these amazingly, I mean, look at TripAdvisor, look how that's evolved. And you talked about spoofing the government yesterday, Cressy. But, you know, we have people who spoof Google, spoof Twitter. Once these things evolve, then people try and do bad things to them, right? You have crime, you have bullying, you have spoofing. So we engineers have to think about that when we're building them. So everything, YouTube, you know, what went viral with, you know, certain videos that attracted everybody, and suddenly everybody's into YouTube, and it becomes something new. So anyway, Zooniverse is the citizen science detecting people picking out galaxies from astronomical photos. If you want to know more about this, there's a MOOC, and Graham's talking about MOOCs this afternoon, so that's good. There's a web science MOOC. I want to finish, I'll just be another 5 minutes, about the Web Observatory, because this is really why I'm here. This is a call to arms and a plea of how we're going to do research in this area going forward. I was thinking about how the physicists train their telescopes out on the stars, take all those beautiful pictures, and then over the decades, physicists are very good at this, they tell wonderful stories about what's happening out there, but no one observatory can see the whole universe. And so they share their data, they share their analytical tools, and of course they share the manufacturing telescopes. They buy the telescopes from whoever manufactures them. They share, they collect information, huge amounts of data. They're almost, you know, they're hugely behind the big data revolution. So we took this idea of observatory, and we also thought about how climate science is done. Now you can't read the words there. Ian Brown did this slide, he needs to think about doing slides for us, and I don't have time to change it. But basically, think about climate science. The only way you can work out, like the way we can improve weather forecasting, is they have lots of data being gathered. So this is the data: sunshine, you know, temperature, rain, snowfall, everything. All around the world, people gather data about, you know, meteorologists gather data, and it's all shared. And then you have the most amazing computer models that go back centuries over data to be able to predict what's going to happen tomorrow. And you can do that because they've got the data and they've got the power of the computer models. And in addition to that, if we have the data about the oceans and the glaciers and the deserts and the rainforests. All that information goes into trying to understand what we are doing or not doing to our planet and how our climate is changing. But it's all about collecting and storing, preserving, curating data. And my argument is we have to do that in the world, the digital world as well. So we're calling for a global partnership to share data that we collect as part of our research. And we all do this. I heard papers yesterday, people said, you know, I got this data, where is it? Can I have it? Can I look at it? What have you done with it? We've done it with our publications, and we are all increasingly under pressure from our governments to make the data that we use to develop our papers available. I mean, some of it will be very closed and private or commercially in confidence or security issues. It doesn't mean you have to make it all open. But what we want people to do is to announce they've got the data, what data they've got, and keep it. I mean, so much research is done by PhD students, and when they finish, everything they've done disappears. The supervisor goes, the PhD student goes, and nobody can recreate, replicate, reuse, repeat, all the things we should be doing through any longitudinal studies. We also need to share, think of the effort that goes into writing the analytical tools to analyse that data. We need to share that as well. And I also want to create an environment where people can add commentaries and observations about why that happened. Well, I will interpret this data because such and such happened on that year, that day. So this is my colleague Thanasis. We've got our software telescopes trained onto this huge growing digital planet. We want to understand, we want to be able to do observation, experimentation. And I'm going to whiz through these slides because I have run out of time now. They won't all be open, they'll be shareable, maybe. Some will be very private, but we'll tell people they're there, and then we'll link it all up. And we'll link up, so we can tell people where the work's happened, who owns the data. And the ambition is very simple, it's to map the digital universe. And it's a rather big project and very simple. We have an observatory at Southampton. It exists of a data repository, a set of analytical tools, and a portal so that you don't have to be a techie to look at this. If I just see if this works. Yeah, I think so. So this is live. So if you look here, you get a list of data sets. I'm going to show you one in a minute. So I'll show you the slides rather than wait for it to load. You get a list of data sets and a list of what visualizations we've built so that you can, and people can add visualizations based on the data that's in there. So for example, here's one. Very multicultural. This is work I did with my colleagues at Xinhua. Our students got together to analyse the salt crisis after the Fukushima accident, and because they ran out of salt and they were worried about the radiation coming in from Fukushima. The heat map is where people are talking about this on the social networks. And what we looked at is humour. When did humour, now I learned a lot more about this yesterday, but we were working with our Chinese colleagues to detect when humour came in and about telling jokes about the fact that there wasn't any salt. And then the fact that salt came back and the humour got less black and more white. Anyway, in our terms. So all sorts of things. We're looking at when do you first see something, do people look in Wikipedia, do they see it from Twitter or Google, when things first get talked about, that sort of thing. And the idea is we link all the observatories up, and how do we catalogue them? Well, I'll skip through that. We use schema.org, and on the Web Trust site, the aim is to have pointers to where all the observatories are, and what data's in them, and what projects are happening. And this is what we want to be able to do, right? This is, we want to do good science, repeat, replicate, reuse, reference, retrieve, review, replay, so on, in ways that we couldn't before. Now the web is changing all the time, and we need to help create the evidence for the policymakers, for the businesses, to understand what the future might be. How do we forecast? what's going to happen to a social network? How do we forecast what a particular policy change a government makes will do for those citizens or for the global citizenry? And I'll skip through the Internet of Things. I just wanted to point out, so there was a lovely talk yesterday about what's happening in Myanmar. This is one of my students working with a street worker in Kenya, using his smartphone to do business and actually sell his jewellery to Germany. This is the future, bringing this on board. We need, this is a cry for longitudinal studies, for cross-disciplinary, cross-national work. We must be cognizant that the internet will radically change our research methodologies. And most importantly, we owe it to future generations of historians, sociologists, political scientists, economists, as well as technical, to preserve and curate the data we generate as part of our research and to share the analytical tools, the commentaries and the observations wherever possible. And I'm hoping that WUN will seize this challenge and run with it. Thank you.